Judge Judy thought she could intimidate anyone who walked into her courtroom. For decades, she'd built her reputation on tearing down people with her sharp tongue and zero-tolerance attitude. But when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped into that studio, everything changed. What happened in the next 20 minutes left the 81-year-old television legend trembling and walking out in defeat. This wasn't just a courtroom showdown. It was the moment a fearless young black woman from Texas showed America that the old guard's intimidation tactics don't work anymore. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the dramatic political showdowns that are reshaping America. Trust me, you're going to want to see every second of how Jasmine Crockett dismantled one of television's most feared judges. The studio lights blazed as cameras rolled for what was supposed to be a routine television appearance. Judge Judy sat behind her imposing bench, black robes flowing, that familiar scowl already forming on her weathered face. At 81, she'd made millions by humiliating people on national television, and today she had her sights set on a new target. Jasmine Crockett walked in wearing a sharp navy blue suit, her natural hair styled perfectly, confidence radiating from every step. The 33-year-old congresswoman from Texas had no idea that Judge Judy was about to try the wrong person on the wrong day. "Ms. Crockett," Judge Judy began, her voice dripping with that condescending tone that had made her famous. "You think you're some kind of hotshot politician, don't you?" The audience fell silent. This wasn't going to be a normal legal discussion. Judge Judy had come for blood, and Jasmine was about to give her a fight she'd never forget. To understand what happened next, you need to know exactly who these two women are and why this confrontation was years in the making. Judge Judy had ruled television courtrooms for over 25 years. Worth over $400 million, she'd built an empire on tough talk and public humiliation. Her show was watched by millions who tuned in to see her destroy people with her razor-sharp tongue. She was used to everyone cowering before her authority. What made Judge Judy so formidable wasn't just her legal background. It was her psychological approach. She had perfected the art of intimidation through decades of practice. From her family court days in Manhattan to her television empire, she had developed a system that broke people down systematically. First came the condescending tone, then the personal attacks, followed by the complete dismissal of their dignity. Her success formula was simple but devastating. Identify someone's insecurity, attack it relentlessly, and watch them crumble under the pressure. It had worked on thousands of people over the years. Single mothers, struggling fathers, young adults making mistakes. They all fell victim to her psychological warfare disguised as justice. But Judge Judy had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated the woman sitting across from her. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just any politician. This was a woman who'd fought her way from humble beginnings in St. Louis to become one of the youngest members of Congress. A civil rights attorney who'd spent years defending people who couldn't defend themselves. A black woman who'd faced down bigger bullies than Judge Judy her entire life. At 33, Jasmine represented everything the old establishment feared. Young, fearless, brilliant, and absolutely unwilling to be intimidated by anyone, no matter how famous or powerful they thought they were. Her path to Congress hadn't been easy. She'd overcome poverty, discrimination, and countless people who told her she was too young or too inexperienced to make a difference. In law school, professors had tried to break her spirit with Socratic questioning designed to humiliate. In her early legal career, opposing counsel had attempted to intimidate her with aggressive tactics. As a civil rights attorney, she'd faced down corrupt officials who thought they could silence her with threats and pressure. Each of these experiences had taught her something valuable. Bullies only have power if you give it to them, and Jasmine Crockett had stopped giving bullies power a long time ago. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about two strong women clashing on television. This was about whether the old guard could still silence the new generation of leaders. It was about whether respect had to be earned or could still be demanded through fear. It was about the fundamental question of how we treat each other in positions of power. Judge Judy thought her reputation would be enough to make this young congresswoman back down. She was about to learn that some people don't scare easily. Jasmine had walked into that studio knowing exactly who Judge Judy was and what she represented. But she'd also come prepared with something Judge Judy didn't expect: Facts, receipts, and absolutely zero tolerance for disrespect. As the cameras rolled and the tension built, both women sat there sizing each other up. Judge Judy saw a young politician she could embarrass for ratings. Jasmine saw an out-of-touch celebrity who was about to get a reality check. Neither of them knew it yet, but the next few minutes would change everything. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she prepared to launch her first real attack. She'd done this dance thousands of times before, established dominance early, hit hard, and watched people crumble under pressure. "Let me tell you something, Ms. Crockett," Judge Judy began, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I've been dealing with people like you for decades. Young, arrogant politicians who think they know everything but haven't lived long enough to understand how the real world works." The audience stirred uneasily. This wasn't the usual legal banter they expected. Judge Judy was going personal, and everyone could feel it. Jasmine sat perfectly still, her expression calm but alert. She'd faced hostile questioning in Congress, dealt with racist attacks from opponents, and survived character assassination attempts that would have destroyed weaker people. Judge Judy's intimidation tactics were nothing new. "You come in here thinking your little law degree and your fancy title make you special," Judge Judy continued, warming up to her assault. "But I've got news for you, sweetheart. I was practicing law before you were even born. I was putting criminals behind bars while you were playing with dolls." The crowd began to murmur. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Judy was really going for it today, and everyone could sense that this was different from her usual tough love approach. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of looking intimidated or defensive, Jasmine Crockett smiled. Not a nervous smile or a forced grin, a genuine, confident smile that seemed to say, "Is that all you've got?" "Your Honor," Jasmine said, her voice steady and clear. "I respect your experience and your accomplishments. But respect works both ways." Judge Judy's eyebrows shot up. People didn't usually push back this quickly or this calmly. Most guests were already stuttering and apologizing by this point. "Excuse me?" Judge Judy snapped. "I don't think you understand how this works, young lady. In my courtroom, I ask the questions and you answer them. I don't need lessons in respect from someone who's been in Congress for 5 minutes." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Camera operators adjusted their angles, sensing that something big was building. The audience leaned forward, knowing they were witnessing something unusual. Jasmine remained composed, but there was steel in her voice when she responded. "I've been in Congress long enough to know that experience means nothing if it comes with arrogance. And I've been practicing law long enough to know that intimidation tactics don't work when you're dealing with someone who knows their worth." Judge Judy's face began to redden. This wasn't going according to plan. The young congresswoman was supposed to be backing down by now, not standing her ground with such poise. "Don't you dare lecture me about law practice," Judge Judy shot back, her voice rising. "I was a family court judge for 16 years before you ever thought about law school. I've seen every kind of case, dealt with every kind of person. You think your civil rights work makes you some kind of hero?" That's when the atmosphere in the room completely changed. Judge Judy had just crossed a line that she didn't even realize existed. Jasmine's smile faded, and for the first time, steel flashed in her eyes. The audience fell completely silent, sensing that the young congresswoman was about to show them exactly who they were dealing with. "My civil rights work," Jasmine said slowly, each word carefully measured, "has actually helped people. Real people facing real problems, while you've been making millions entertaining audiences by humiliating people on television." Judge Judy's mouth fell open slightly. No one talked to her like that. No one. "How dare you!" Judge Judy exploded, standing up behind her bench. "I've helped more people than you'll ever—" "Helped them?" Jasmine interrupted, her voice cutting through Judge Judy's outburst like a blade. "Or exploited them for entertainment, because there's a difference between justice and reality TV ratings." The audience gasped. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others pulled out their phones, knowing they were witnessing television history. Judge Judy stood there, speechless for perhaps the first time in decades. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She was just getting started. "You want to talk about experience, Judge? Let's talk about it. You've spent the last 25 years turning real people's problems into entertainment. I've spent my career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. So please, tell me more about how experience works. Judge Judy's hands were visibly shaking now. The woman who'd built an empire on never backing down was facing someone who absolutely refused to be intimidated. You think you can come into my courtroom and disrespect me? Judge Judy yelled, her composure completely shattered. Your courtroom? Jasmine stood up slowly, her full 5 feet 7 inches frame commanding the space. This is a television studio, Judge, and I'm not here as your defendant. I'm here as your equal. The word equal hung in the air like a thunderclap. Judge Judy stared at this young woman who just refused to play the game everyone else played, the game where Judge Judy always won. But the audience could see something else happening. Years of watching Judge Judy dominate had conditioned them to expect submission. Now they were witnessing something unprecedented, a complete role reversal. The intimidator was becoming the intimidated. You don't understand, Judge Judy sputtered, her voice losing its commanding edge. I've built something here. I've created order from chaos. People respect what I've accomplished. Do they respect you, or do they fear you? Jasmine asked pointedly. Because there's a big difference between the two, and I'm not sure you know which one you've actually achieved. The question hit like a physical blow. Judge Judy had spent decades assuming that fear and respect were the same thing. She'd built her entire brand on making people afraid to challenge her, never stopping to consider whether that actually made her respectable. I help people, Judge Judy said weakly, but even she seemed to hear how hollow her words sounded. By humiliating them? By making their worst moments into entertainment for millions of viewers? Jasmine shook her head. Judge, I've read the psychological studies. People who appear on shows like this often report feeling worse about themselves afterward, not better. That's not help. That's exploitation. The audience was completely captivated now. This wasn't just about two strong women clashing. This was about the fundamental philosophy of how we treat each other in the public sphere. You've confused volume with authority, Jasmine continued, her voice steady and clear. You've mistaken intimidation for wisdom. And worst of all, you've convinced yourself that making people feel small makes you bigger. For the first time in her television career, Judge Judy looked uncertain. The foundation of her entire persona, that everyone would eventually bow to her authority, was crumbling in real time. And Jasmine Crockett was just getting warmed up. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media and talked about for years to come. Jasmine Crockett was about to deliver a masterclass in how to handle a bully. Judge Judy, still standing behind her bench, pointed a shaking finger at Jasmine. I have been showing respect to people longer than you've been alive. Have you? Jasmine asked calmly, pulling out her phone. Because I did a little research before coming here today. Judge Judy's eyes widened. This was completely off script. Guests weren't supposed to come prepared with research. They were supposed to be intimidated and unprepared. Let's talk about respect, Judge, Jasmine continued, her voice growing stronger. Let's talk about the 2019 case where you mocked a domestic violence survivor for choosing her abusive relationship. Let's talk about the 2021 episode where you told a struggling single mother that her poverty was her own fault for having children she couldn't afford. The studio fell deadly silent. Even the camera operators stopped moving. Judge Judy's face went pale. Those people came to you seeking justice, Jasmine continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a sword. And you turned their pain into punchlines for your audience's entertainment. That's taken out of context, Judge Judy stammered, but her usual commanding presence was completely gone. Is it? Jasmine looked directly into the cameras. Because I represent constituents who've been on your show. Real people with real problems who left feeling more humiliated than when they arrived. Is that justice, Judge? Or is that just good television? Judge Judy tried to regain control. You don't understand the complexity of... I understand perfectly, Jasmine cut her off smoothly. I understand that you've made a fortune convincing people that humiliation equals justice, that shouting equals wisdom, that fear equals respect. The audience was completely mesmerized. Many had their phones out, recording what was becoming the most dramatic television moment of the year. "But here's what you don't understand, Judge," Jasmine continued, stepping closer to the bench. "My generation doesn't confuse loudness with leadership. We don't mistake intimidation for intelligence. And we absolutely don't accept disrespect from anyone, no matter how long they've been on television." Judge Judy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For 25 years, she'd controlled every conversation, dominated every interaction. Now she was facing someone who not only refused to be dominated, but was actively dismantling her entire approach. "You want to talk about age and experience?" Jasmine's voice rose, filled with passion and power. "I'm 33 years old, and I've already passed more meaningful legislation than most people do in entire careers. I've defended civil rights, fought for voting rights, and stood up to bullies way more powerful than you." "I am not a bully," Judge Judy protested, but her voice cracked as she said it. "Really?" Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Then what do you call trying to humiliate me on national television because I wouldn't bow down to your authority? What do you call mocking people's pain for entertainment? What do you call building a career on making others feel small so you can feel big?" Judge Judy staggered slightly, gripping the bench for support. The woman who'd made millions making others feel powerless was experiencing powerlessness for the first time in decades. "The difference between us, Judge," Jasmine said, her voice now firm but not cruel, "is that I use my platform to lift people up. You've used yours to tear them down. I fight for justice. You've turned justice into a joke." The audience erupted. Some were cheering. Others were gasping. Everyone was recording. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a generational shift happening in real time. Judge Judy tried one last desperate attempt to regain control. "You have no right to come into my show and—" "Your show?" Jasmine interrupted with a laugh that wasn't mean, just genuinely amused. "Judge, this isn't your show anymore. This is the moment when America sees that the old ways of doing things, the intimidation, the bullying, the respect me because I said so attitude, that's over." "You can't," Judge Judy started, but her voice was barely a whisper now. "I can, and I just did," Jasmine said firmly. "Because that's what happens when you try to shame someone who has nothing to be ashamed of. That's what happens when you try to intimidate someone who's been fighting bigger battles than this her entire life." Judge Judy looked around the studio desperately, as if searching for support that wasn't coming. Her production team looked stunned. The audience was completely on Jasmine's side now. Even the cameras seemed to be focusing more on the young congresswoman than on the judge. "You know what the real problem is, Judge?" Jasmine asked, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its power. "You've been so used to people being afraid of you that you forgot how to actually earn respect. Real respect. The kind that comes from treating people with dignity, not from making them feel small." Judge Judy's hands were visibly trembling now. The foundation of everything she'd built her career on was crumbling before her eyes. "I've spent my entire career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves," Jasmine continued. "Standing up to corrupt officials, challenging unjust systems, facing down opponents who thought they could silence me because I'm young, because I'm black, because I'm a woman. You really think I'm going to be intimidated by someone whose biggest accomplishment is making good television?" The silence in the studio was deafening. Judge Judy stood there, completely defeated, realizing that she'd picked a fight with someone who was not only unafraid of her, but who had just exposed everything hollow about her approach to authority. "So here's what's going to happen," Jasmine said, gathering her purse and standing to her full height. "I'm going to walk out of here with my dignity intact, and you're going to sit there and think about whether the next person you try to humiliate might just be someone else who refuses to play your game." She turned toward the exit, then paused and looked back. "Oh, and Judge? Next time you want to lecture someone about respect, make sure you're actually showing some yourself." The audience erupted in applause as Jasmine Crockett walked toward the exit, her head held high, her confidence unshaken. Behind her, Judge Judy stood trembling behind her bench, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. For the first time in 25 years, Judge Judy had been completely and utterly outmatched. As the studio doors closed behind Jasmine Crockett, The aftermath of what had just transpired began immediately. Judge Judy stood behind her bench, still trembling, her face pale and her usually commanding presence completely shattered. "Cut! Cut!" yelled the show's producer, rushing onto the set. The cameras stopped rolling, but the damage was already done. In the age of social media and instant communication, nothing stays contained for long. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were already spreading across social platforms. Someone in the audience had been live streaming, and the moment when Jasmine said, "This isn't your show anymore," was being shared faster than anyone could track. Judge Judy slowly sat down in her chair, removing her glasses with shaking hands. For 25 years, she had been the undisputed queen of television justice. She had humiliated thousands of people, built an empire on intimidation, and never once backed down from anyone. Now, she'd just been systematically dismantled by a 33-year-old congresswoman who'd refused to play by her rules. "Ma'am, are you okay?" her assistant asked, approaching cautiously. Judge Judy looked up, and for the first time in decades, people on her own set saw vulnerability in her eyes. I need a moment," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett walked through the studio parking lot with her head held high, already fielding calls from her staff about the confrontation. She wasn't gloating or celebrating. This had never been about humiliating Judge Judy. It had been about refusing to be humiliated herself. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, text messages from fellow Congress members, missed calls from news producers, and social media alerts that were already showing the confrontation going viral in real time. "Congresswoman, how do you feel about what just happened?" asked a reporter who'd somehow already arrived on the scene. Jasmine paused, considering her words carefully. "I feel like I did what I always do, stood up for myself and for the principles I believe in. No one, regardless of their fame or fortune, has the right to disrespect another human being for entertainment." "But don't you think you were harsh with Judge Judy? She's been a television icon for decades," the reporter pressed. Jasmine's expression grew serious. "Being an icon doesn't give you a license to tear people down. If anything, it gives you more responsibility to build people up. Fame should come with accountability, not immunity from criticism." Inside her car, Jasmine took a moment to process what had just happened. She thought about all the young women, particularly young black women, who would see this confrontation. She thought about everyone who'd ever been told to know their place or respect their elders, even when those elders weren't showing them any respect in return. This wasn't just about her standing up to Judge Judy. This was about setting an example that you don't have to accept mistreatment from anyone, no matter how powerful they are or how long they've been in their position. Her phone rang. It was her chief of staff. "Congresswoman, the video is everywhere. I mean everywhere. It's already being called the moment Judge Judy met her match." Jasmine smiled slightly. "Good. Maybe it'll inspire other people to stand up for themselves too." Back in the studio, production staff were scrambling. This wasn't just any regular episode. This was a complete destruction of their show's entire format. Judge Judy's authority, the foundation of everything the show was built on, had been completely undermined. The social media explosion was unlike anything anyone had seen. "Jasmine destroys." Judy began trending within the first hour. The clip of Jasmine asking, "What do you call building a career on making others feel small so you can feel big?" hit 1 million views before dinner time. Conservative and liberal commentators alike were weighing in, but surprisingly, most of the response was positive for Jasmine. Even people who disagreed with her politics were impressed by how she'd handled herself under pressure. "I don't agree with Crockett on policy," tweeted one prominent conservative commentator, "but I have to respect how she stood her ground. That was masterful." A liberal pundit wrote, "This is what real leadership looks like. Jasmine Crockett just showed America that our generation won't be bullied by anyone." The clips spread beyond political circles. Young people especially were sharing the confrontation, seeing it as a symbol of their generation's refusal to accept the "because I said so" authority that had dominated previous eras. One particularly viral TikTok showed the moment when Judge Judy's hand started trembling, with the caption, "When you try to intimidate someone who's been fighting real battles their whole life." But the social media response wasn't just about entertainment. It sparked serious conversations about power dynamics in America. Psychology professors began using the confrontation as a teaching tool about healthy versus toxic authority. Leadership experts analyzed how Jasmine had maintained her composure while systematically dismantling Judge Judy's intimidation tactics. What we saw, posted a renowned conflict resolution specialist, was a masterclass in how to handle a bully. Crockett never raised her voice, never got personal, but she absolutely refused to be diminished. She used facts, principles, and unshakable self-respect as her weapons. Young professionals began sharing their own stories of standing up to difficult bosses or authority figures, using the hashtag #JasmineDestroysJudy as a rallying cry for workplace dignity. A viral LinkedIn post read, "Watched Jasmine Crockett handle Judge Judy today. Tomorrow I'm having that conversation with my micromanaging boss. If she can stand up to a TV legend, I can stand up for myself in a conference room." The generational divide in reactions was particularly telling. Older viewers, many of whom had grown up in eras where authority was rarely questioned, had mixed responses. Some were shocked by what they saw as disrespect toward an elder. Others, however, found themselves reconsidering their own assumptions about power and respect. "I've been watching Judge Judy for 20 years, wrote one 65-year-old viewer. "I always thought she was tough but fair. Watching this young woman stand up to her made me realize maybe I've been confusing fear with fairness all along." 3 days after the confrontation, Judge Judy's representatives announced that she was taking a brief hiatus from filming for health reasons. Industry insiders, however, knew the truth. She was struggling to come to terms with what had happened. For the first time in her career, Judge Judy had encountered someone who not only refused to be intimidated, but who had turned the tables completely. The woman who'd made millions making others feel powerless had experienced true powerlessness herself. Jasmine, meanwhile, returned to Congress and continued her work as if nothing unusual had happened. When reporters asked her about the incident during a press conference about voting rights legislation, she was characteristically direct. "I went on that show the same way I approach everything in my life, with preparation, principle, and a refusal to be disrespected." If that's unusual in today's media environment, then maybe that says more about our media environment than it does about me. The long-term implications of the confrontation were significant. Judge Judy's show, which had been a ratings powerhouse for decades, saw a significant decline in viewership. More importantly, other young politicians began citing Jasmine's performance as inspiration for how to handle hostile media environments. "She showed us that you don't have to accept disrespect just because someone has a bigger platform," said a young state representative from California. "Respect isn't given based on age or fame, it's earned through behavior." The confrontation also sparked broader conversations about generational change in American leadership. Older viewers who'd grown up respecting authority simply because it existed were forced to confront the reality that younger generations expected that authority to be justified and earned. "What we witnessed," wrote a prominent sociologist, "was more than just a television confrontation. It was a microcosm of the broader generational shift happening in American society. The old model of respect your elders simply because they're older is being replaced by earn respect through your actions." 6 months later, Judge Judy announced her retirement from television. While she cited wanting to spend more time with family, everyone in the industry knew that the confrontation with Jasmine Crockett had fundamentally changed how she saw herself and her legacy. The announcement came as a shock to the entertainment industry, but those close to the situation weren't surprised. Sources inside the production company revealed that Judge Judy had been struggling with the aftermath of the confrontation for months. She'd reportedly watched the viral clips dozens of times, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. "She kept asking herself how she'd lost control so completely," said a former producer who spoke on condition of anonymity. For 25 years, she'd been the one asking the tough questions and making others uncomfortable. Suddenly, she was on the receiving end, and she didn't know how to handle it. The psychological impact on Judge Judy had been profound. Friends reported that she'd become withdrawn, questioning not just her television methods but her entire approach to authority and respect. The woman who'd built an empire on certainty was now filled with doubt. Industry analysts noted that her show's ratings had never recovered from the confrontation. Viewers, particularly younger ones, had started seeing her tactics differently after watching Jasmine Crockett's masterful response. What had once seemed like justified toughness now appeared to many as unnecessary cruelty. The Crockett incident changed everything, wrote a prominent television critic. It exposed the difference between authentic authority and performative dominance. Once viewers saw that distinction, they couldn't unsee it. In her final interview, she was asked directly about the incident. For the first time in her career, Judge Judy looked genuinely reflective. "I built my career on being tough," she said quietly. "Maybe sometimes I confused being tough with being cruel. Maybe I forgot that real strength doesn't come from making others feel weak." The admission was stunning, coming from someone who'd never shown vulnerability on camera. It was clear that Jasmine Crockett's words had forced a level of self-reflection that Judge Judy had never experienced before. "That young woman," Judge Judy continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "she taught me something I should have learned decades ago. Respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn through how you treat people, especially when you have power over them." Jasmine Crockett's political career, meanwhile, continued to flourish. The confrontation had introduced her to millions of Americans who'd never heard of her before, and many were impressed not just by her courage, but by her composure under pressure. "What she did that day," said a veteran political strategist, "was show America that our young leaders aren't intimidated by the old guard's tactics. They're prepared, they're principled, and they're absolutely fearless when defending their dignity." The story became a case study in communications classes, a viral sensation that transcended politics, and ultimately, a symbol of how power dynamics were shifting in American society. But perhaps the most significant impact was on young people who watched the confrontation and saw something they'd rarely seen before. Someone their age refusing to be diminished by someone older, more famous, and supposedly more powerful. "She didn't just stand up for herself," wrote one college student in a viral blog post. "She stood up for all of us who've been told to respect our elders even when those elders weren't showing us any respect in return." The trembling hands that had marked Judge Judy's final moments on camera that day became a symbol, not of personal weakness, but of the end of an era when intimidation and humiliation could pass for authority and wisdom. And Jasmine Crockett, she continued doing exactly what she'd always done, fighting for her constituents, standing up for her principles, and refusing to be anyone other than exactly who she was. The day Judge Judy tried to shame Jasmine Crockett became the day America learned that some people simply cannot be shamed, especially when they have nothing to be ashamed of. But the story didn't end there. The confrontation became a catalyst for broader conversations about power, respect, and accountability in American society. Universities began incorporating the incident into their communications and leadership curricula. Business schools used it as a case study in effective conflict resolution and maintaining composure under pressure. The ripple effects extended far beyond television and politics. Workplace harassment training programs started using clips from the confrontation to demonstrate how to respond to bullying behavior. Mental health professionals pointed to Jasmine's response as an example of healthy boundary setting and self-advocacy. "What Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated," wrote a leading psychologist in a widely shared analysis, "was that you can be respectful without being submissive, firm without being aggressive, and confident without being arrogant. Those are skills everyone can learn from." The confrontation also sparked important conversations about ageism in both directions. While some criticized Jasmine for being disrespectful to her elders, many more praised her for challenging the toxic assumption that age automatically deserves deference regardless of behavior. "Age brings experience, but it doesn't guarantee wisdom," became a popular quote attributed to the incident. "And experience without empathy is just practiced cruelty." A year after the confrontation, Jasmine Crockett was invited to speak at leadership conferences across the country. Her message was always the same: stand up for your principles, prepare thoroughly for every challenge, and never let anyone convince you that you're worth less than you know you are. "People ask me if I regret what happened that day," she would tell audiences, "but I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret refusing to be diminished. And I don't regret showing young people that they don't have to accept mistreatment just because someone older or more famous is dishing it out." The confrontation had transformed from a single television moment into a cultural touchstone, a reminder that respect is earned, not inherited, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be treated poorly. That's the story of how a 33-year-old congresswoman from Texas walked into a television studio and walked out having changed the conversation about power, respect, and authority in America. If you enjoyed seeing this breakdown of how real leadership handles intimidation, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about the political moments that are reshaping our country. Because in today's America, the most important battles aren't just happening in Congress, they're happening everywhere people choose to stand up for their dignity. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we break down these incredible moments of courage and conviction. And let us know in the comments, what's the most important lesson you learned from watching Jasmine Crockett handle this situation? Because sometimes the best education comes from watching someone refuse to be educated in the wrong way. And sometimes those battles are won not by the person with the loudest voice, but by the person with the strongest principles.